Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Cracking the Cryptic. Now today I think we have a treat of a puzzle for you. Now I did a video a couple of days ago on a new compiler who's been publishing puzzles on Logic Masters Germany by the name of Phistomefel. And Phistomefel actually emailed me last night in response to that video and unbelievably confessed to the fact that he's only got into setting puzzles as a result of watching Cracking the Cryptic. Now this is stunning to me that somebody so accomplished has sort of only come to puzzle setting through our videos. I mean, it's wonderful. And he suggested that we might take a look at this puzzle. And I had a look at it. You can see it's a Little Killer Sudoku. I'll explain the rules in a moment if you're not familiar with it. But it appeared on Logic Masters Germany a week or so ago, and it has rave reviews. It really has got a lot of very, very good feedback. So this should be absolutely stunning. Now, Phistomefel also gave me a tip about solving this. He says it has a trick at the start and a very narrow solving path. So not exactly giving me lots of digits to go on, but a little bit of information there. So hopefully that will help us to find a way through the puzzle. Now if you want to have a go, click on the link under the video as usual. And if you don't know how Little Killer Sudoku works, let's remind ourselves of the rules. So you can see these arrowed numbers outside the grid. Well, let's look at the 31. That would mean these four cells along the arrow have to sum up to 31. Now remember, it's very important to remember that you can repeat a digit along this line. So obviously these two cells couldn't be the same number because they're both in the same 3x3 block. But this number could absolutely be the same as that number, could absolutely be the same as that number. There's nothing to prevent 3 repeated digits along this 31 sum. So we're going to need to bear that in mind. And with that, let's get cracking. Now, what occurs to me first here? 15 in two cells, that's got to be either 6, 9 or 7, 8. So let's put that in. 20 clue here. That is very long. How is that? 7-celled 20 clue. But here we run into one of the issues with the fact that you can repeat digits, because actually this 20 clue actually cuts across 5 boxes in the grid. So in theory we could have 5 ones here. We could have a 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. There's nothing to prevent that. So 5 ones add to 5. That would mean the other 2 cells have to sum up to 15. And in effect, this 20 clue has very little restriction on it. Let's have a look. Oh yes, okay, I can see how to start. 21 and 13 here, these 2 clues. Now these are all in the same 3x3 box, and they add to 34. How do you make 34 in 5 cells? Well, there's only one way. If you're good at Kukuru, you'll know that that has to be 4, 6, 7, 8 and 9. So we're off and running. And now the 25 clue is a bit more restricted than it was, because these 2 cells, well, they can be a maximum of 8. If we made those 3 and 5, these 2 cells would have to sum to 17. So those 2 would have to be 8 and 9. But on the other hand, yeah, I nearly made a mistake there. Because you can repeat a digit, it's possible this is 5 and 2, because then that would leave the 25 clue with 18 more, and we could put a 9 here and a 9 here. Okay, so we know there's a 5 in one of those 2 squares, that's for sure, and we know the other digit is a 2 or a 3. So we know there's a 1 in one of those 2 squares. And I suppose we know that these 2 squares must be 1, 2 and 3, because we know the 5 is here, we know the 4 is there. So we've made a little bit of progress, still no actual numbers in the grid. The 26 clue, I don't see how that's particularly restricted at the moment. So we're going to have to look somewhere else. Well, I guess as the 5 is in one of those two squares, the 13 can't contain an 8 anymore, because that would require a 5 in the other position. No, I don't think I'm going to be able to do anything more down here. Let's have a look up here. 13 and 15, that's 28. That's not much use, I don't think. 31 in 4. Problem is, again, with being able to repeat a digit, that's not actually quite as restrictive as you would think. But here, right, yeah, okay, I think I see the idea here. So I'm going to highlight these cells. These are the cells, obviously, that are covered by these 3 arrows. Now, these 2 squares, therefore, are obviously outside the total, but there's a 3 by 3 box up here as well. Now, the 3 by 3 box is going to add to 45 because it will contain the numbers from 1 to 9. So, how big can these blue squares be? So 13 plus 15 plus 31, that's 59. Right, so let's imagine these 2 squares added to 5. What would that mean? That would mean these squares had to add up to 40. But now if we know that all of the purple squares add up to 59, that would make these 2 squares have to sum to 19. That is not possible. I cannot put 10 in either of these cells. So these 2 squares have to add to a number less than 5. So it's either 1 and 3 or 1 and 2. And there's definitely a 1. So we've got a similar position actually. We've got 1s in one of these 2 squares, 1s in one of these 2 squares. So there must be a 1 in one of those 3 positions. And that's obviously following, because if this is the 1, there will be a 1 here in the finished grid. If this is the 1, there will be a 1 here. So we need a 1 somewhere in column 2. Now, if this is 1 and 3, that adds up to 4. That would make these squares add up to 41. These 2 squares would have to sum up to 18, which they could, because they could be 2 9s. So if this is 1, 3, these are 2 9s. If this is 1, 2, this would add to 42. These would have to add up to 17, so they'd have to be 9 and 8. Now that might be interesting, because look, we've now got, I don't need to highlight these anymore. Let me get rid of the highlighting, but I want to leave the highlighting there, because we've now got a funny pattern of 8s and 9s and a funny pattern of 1s. We've got an 8-9 pair in column 1, so we can get rid of 8-9 from this square, and we can get rid of 9 from that square. Now this is a 13 total, so if the 9 isn't here, the 4 isn't here anymore. Now the 8 is locked into one of those 2 squares in the box. And neither of these squares can be a 4 anymore, because we've got rid of a 9 as a possibility from this square. If I put a 4 in this square or this square, the other square becomes an 8, but we need a 9 in this square to make the 21 total. So we can get rid of 4 from those 2 squares. And that, oh, now we've got a 6, 7, 8, 9 quadruple in the bottom row, look. Okay, so these squares have got to be 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. I don't really see how to use that because oh, hang on, I see what I've got to do. Ah, sorry, I was being a bit slow here. Now, we looked at the possibility of these two squares being 5 and 2. Now, if these are 5 and 2, these two squares are 9. But if these two squares are 9, because these 9s share a column with these two squares, both of these squares would now have to be 8. And if both of these squares are 8, I don't think that worked, did it? Because if both of these are adding up to 8, we know that's 16. We know that the total, once we add these yellow squares in, has to be 59. So that would mean that these yellow squares have to add to 43. And that would mean these two squares have to sum up to 2, which is impossible. So that is interesting. So this pair here is not 2 9s. And it's not 2 8s, because we know if it's 2 8s, that's 16. These two squares would have to sum up to 9, which is impossible. So these two squares are 8 and 9. And therefore these two squares are also 8 and 9. And that, I think, is useful, because now if these are 8 and 9, that's 17. The 2 is impossible into either of these squares. This is a 3 5 pair. Therefore, this is a 1 2 pair. And the corollary of that, presumably up here, is if we've got 17 into those squares, these have to add up to 42. So these have to add up to 3. So again, we remove the 3 here. And oh, now we've got... So now there's a 2 in those squares as well. Exactly the same logic as with the 1s. Right, so what am I meant to be seeing now? This must be so... I must be so close to seeing what I'm meant to be seeing, I think. So if these add up to 17, these add up to 14. So these, this is either 5 and 9 or 6 and 8. And the 13 total, this now can't be 8 or 9. So this must be 4, 5, 6 or 7. And this must be, what's that going to be, 6, 7, 8 or 9. So there's now a 3 in one of those squares, look. Oh, hang on, I haven't used this 26 clue yet. Yeah, this might be worth looking at now, because all of a sudden there are some restrictions along this diagonal that we didn't have before. So in particular, let's put in the maximum and minimum values. This square can't actually be a 1, 2 or an 8 and a 9. So that can be a 3, that's the minimum value, or a 7 is the maximum. This one, well, that can be a 1 still, and it can be a 7, but it can't be an 8 or a 9. That one could be a 1 or a 2. This one also sees an 8 and a 9 in the column, so this can be a 1 or a 7, or 1 through 7 I suppose, and this one obviously, let's just get rid of the 3, 4, 5 just to make it clear. Right, so this diagonal now, these are all the maximum and minimum values. So if this square, well, let's look at this square. So let's pick the maximum values for those 4 squares. That would be 12, 14, 21. So there's no way this can be a 3, because even if I take the maximum for each of the other 4 cells, this has to be at least a 5. Ah, yes, now we're getting somewhere. Now where can a 3 go in column 1? Look, it can only go here. So this is a 3. And I think we've got to carry on looking at this diagonal, because let's look at this one now. So 7, 9, 16, 21. This one also can't, this one has a minimum value of 5 as well. And that, look at that. Those 5 squares in column 2 now are all 5 or greater. Now, if that's the case, it's not possible for us to have a 5 in this square, because 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, there are 5 digits. We know these 5 squares have to be some permutation of those 5 digits. So the other 4 squares in this column have to be the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Therefore, this one cannot be a 5. That is a 3. Therefore, that's a 5. Now there's a 3 in one of those 3 positions. This can't be a 5. Therefore, that can't be a 9. And these 2 squares, now this square can't be a 1 or a 2 now, so there's a 1-2 pair as well in this box. So actually now look, those cells are determined. We don't know which the order of them is, but we now know these squares must be 3, 4 and 6 in some order. So let's put that in. This can't be 6 now. This can't be 6. So this must be a 7, 8 or a 9. And we know these 2 squares have to sum up to 12 because of the 3 here. So this must be a 3, 4 or 5. Well, it can't be 9 therefore. This has to be 4 or 5. Oh, but it can't be 5 for exactly the same reason that this square, or whichever square it was we were looking at, this square couldn't be a 5. This has to be a 4. So that's an 8. And that's massive now. We're now, look at this, we're going to unwind this 17 lot round the purple squares. This has to be a 9 now, so this is a 5 in order to make our 14 total. Therefore this is a 7 and this is a 5. We know that these 2 squares must be 6 and 7 now, so let's put that in, and the 7 here determines the order. This can't be 6 or 7. We know one of these 2 squares is 8, and because of the 8 there, it must be this one. And that one has to be a 7, so that has to be a 6, that has to be a 9, that has to be a 4. Look at that. So we've got a sort of crescent moon now that we've discovered from these arrowed clues on the left-hand side of the grid. That's a beautiful idea. Not easy though. Oh, and I still haven't looked at this clue enough, have I? So the 26 clue, I've now got 12 here, so these squares have to sum up to 14. Therefore, these are all maximum values. Look at that. The maximum value for each of these squares must in fact be the value in order to get me as high as I need to go. So there we go. Now we're going to get the 1s and the 2s resolved. The 5, so now none of, oh, these squares can't contain a 1 or a 5 because we've already got a 1 and a 5 in the row. 2 7s there and 2 8s, so this 15 total can't include a 7 or an 8, and there's a 9 here, so we're going to get more. 9 and 6 now. Must be a 9 in one of those two squares. And a 9 in one of these two squares. And oh, that 9 there is important because look, now we've got a 20 clue that doesn't include a 9 in 3 squares. So that must be 5, 7 and 8. That one can't be an 8. That one can't be a 7. And that one can't be a 5. Oh, 632. So where do we put the number 632 in this box? It must be in those squares. So this one can't be a 4. This must be 2, 3 and 6 in some order. And this must be, what's that going to be? 1, 4, 9. So these squares must be 5, 7 and 8 as well. So let's put that in case that's helpful. 5, 7, 8. There must be 1 now in one of these two squares. Six, no, 6 doesn't work. Oh, now look, on the 20 diagonal, does that hit that? It does hit this 8. So that's a serious restriction given how long this diagonal is. Oh, in fact, there's no way I can put, look, I can't put an 8 or a 7 into this square. Because if I do, even if I put the 7 in, that would imply these 5 squares have to sum up to 5, so I'd have to put 1 in all of them. Now that's not possible, so this is a 5, and I think that's even going to be, yeah, so now we've got an 8 and a 5, so 13, 20 minus 13 is 7. These 5 cells have to sum to 7, but because we have 2 in repeated or in the same 3 by 3 boxes, we now know that this is a 1, 2, and in fact we can do the order there. That must be the 1, that must be the 2, that must be a 1, and this must be a 1, 2 pair as well. So that gets us the 7 we need in the only way that we can do it. 1 here means this is a, oops, this is a 1, this is a 2. Ah, that means, yeah, that means that's a 2 and that's a 1. So now this is a 1, this is a 4, and this is a 9. This is a 2. That's just normal Sudoku rules. So now this is a 2, this is a 1, this is a 1. Oh my goodness. I mean, imagine constructing this, and it's, you know, it's been a very linear journey, but gorgeous to find. So now we know neither of those is 2. This is a 3, 4 pair, so this is a 2, and this must be a 3, 6 pair. I think we've done the 1s, haven't we? Yes, we have, and we must be able to do the 2s. That must be a 2. That's the last 2 in the grid. And we've used these clues, we've used these clues, we've used this clue, we've used the 20 clue. We haven't fully resolved what goes where yet, and we haven't used the 22 clue. And still we don't know very much about the 22 clue, looking at that. So what are we meant to do next? Done 2s. 5s, look, there must be a 5 I think in one of those two positions. No, that's not going to be enough. Oh, 5's up here though. That gives us another 5 into one of those squares. So we can resolve the 5 in the centre, and that gives us a 5 on the right. This 5 is important because it's going to help us resolve the 20 sum. So now this is a 7, that must be an 8, and that's a 5. Therefore that's a 5. The 7 resolves the 7 and the 8 down here. That gives us an 8 there, locks an 8 into one of these two squares. 9 must be in one of those two positions, therefore that's not a 9, this must be the 9. And have we done the 9s now? Not quite. We've got these 9s to resolve. Now, what next? We still haven't got anything on this 22 diagonal. 7s. That must be a 7. That must be a 7. This must be a 7. That's the first number. Look, we've managed to get a number on this 22 diagonal. Good. These two squares have got to be 3 and 4. Right, what am I missing here? 5, 7, 1, 2, 8 here. You can see are mirrored exactly in those squares. 2, 8, 9, 7, 3. There must be a 4 in one of those two squares. I feel I want to do something with 3s or 6s somehow. Now what is the thing I can do with those? Is this... this 6 might be helpful. That locks a 6 into one of those two positions, which locks a 6 into one of those two squares. The 4 here. Sorry, I should have... Oh, maybe I miss... No, I could have got a 4 there already. That's a 4, that's a 3. Therefore there's a 4 in one of these squares. The 3 is nearly in, it locks a 3 into one of those two positions. These two squares here, what do they need to be? That can't be a 4 anymore. These have to be 3 and 6. And there's a 3 here. So this is a 3, this is a 6, that's a 6. Right, so now we're getting somewhere. This has to be 4, 9. This has to be 3, 8. This is not 3. This has to be a 4 or a 6. And this has to be a 4 or a 9. Oh, and now we can use... Yes, we can use the 22 clue. Look at that. We've now got 11 along my 22 diagonal. That means I need 11 more from those 3 squares, but each of them has an option... well, it can only be one of 2 digits, and you can see we have to take 3, 4 and 4. That will sum to 11. That will resolve everything, I suspect. What a brilliant puzzle. 8, 4, 6, 6, 3. That must be a 6 now. That means this is a 3. That's a 4. That's going to have to be a 6 up there. 4, 3 into those squares. This should be a 3. And if I haven't made a mistake, oh, that's a 9. I could have got that ages ago, could I? Maybe. Check. That's how to do it. What a puzzle. 29 minutes. Oh my goodness. So not easy for me. And do let me know in the comments how you got on, whether you stormed through it, whether I've missed any logic. I didn't feel I did. I don't see there was another way to do it apart from finding the sort of crescent moon over on the left hand side and then working our way sort of gradually up the grid on the right hand side. Brilliant puzzle again from Phistomefel. Thank you very much, and we'll be back soon with another edition of Cracking the Cryptic.